Hello, Internet. My name is Jordan. I'm a firefighter who's currently working in Baghdad as a contractor. You might have heard that some crazy stuff has been going on in Iraq the past few days. Each news outlet's reporting different stories with varying levels of accuracy, so I'm going to give you a brief understanding of what's happening, why it's happening, and why you should care. The first thing that you have to understand is that this is complicated. The worst thing you can do in this situation is assume that you know the right thing to do. When I hear people say just bomb them all to hell, it's like complaining about your boss and then your 4-year-old suggesting that you spank him. That's not how conflict resolution works. It's not worth arguing about for the same reason that you don't argue with your 4-year-old. Just move on with your day. The situation has good and bad people on both sides, and remembering when talking about sides, even though a few thousand people might be fighting together, they have a few thousand reasons for coming to the fight. Trying to explain what any large group wants is inherently flawed, so while I'll be doing just that, understand that it's not telling the whole story, and I'm only doing it to give you an entry-level view of the situation. So all of this centers around an organization called the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, commonly called ISIS. They're Sunni Muslims, but more specifically the Wahhabi Muslims, which, though it's technically Sunni, is a very extremist ultra-conservative movement that wants to impose a very strict version of Sharia law. ISIS wants to create a single Islamic State through much of the Middle East, but they aren't a government body so much as they are an organized crime syndicate. They make most of their money extorting business owners in Iraq to support fighting in Syria. What they are not is part of Al-Qaeda. Anytime the news wants you to pay attention, they tell you that a certain group has ties to Al-Qaeda because they assume you won't pay attention otherwise. The origins of this group is that they did start off from a splintering from Al-Qaeda, but they're now a much different group with different intentions, and in Syria have often been fighting against Al-Qaeda. So back in January, they captured the city of Fallujah, which is about 20 miles that away. In the past few days, they've captured Mosul, Tikrit, and these two cities, whose pronunciation you can look up in your own time. What's unique is that they faced very little resistance in these cities. There's a few assumptions as to why, but most of them point to leadership in both the army and police force, telling their subordinates to just disarm and walk away. Keep in mind, these cities that they've taken are predominantly Sunni cities, as that will become pretty big pretty shortly. The other big player you need to know in all of this is Nouri al-Maliki. He's the Shiite Prime Minister of Iraq and has faced a lot of criticism for refusing to work with his Sunni opposition. Under his watch, Iraq has wasted billions of dollars on ineffective programs. They haven't rebuilt infrastructure that's vitally needed, and the Sunni population has been underrepresented in government and feels oppressed even in predominantly Sunni cities by the central Shiite government in Baghdad. He's refused to work with oil companies to get the economy back on track, and even refused to work with the U.S. to keep U.S. troops in country to provide a more smooth transition. In short, he's not exactly the hero of the story, and that's why I'm afraid that you, watching this right now, don't care as much as you could. Innocent people are dying. Whole cities have their way of life being forcibly changed, but without a clear hero, Americans tend not to care. All we've seen our whole lives is superheroes and easy to understand narratives about good versus evil, so when we're presented with challenging problems, we just tune them out. Quick tangent, but you could also view the Kurds as the hero in the story. They're the people in northeast Iraq that govern themselves, but still share oil revenues with Baghdad. They've been really prospering since the fall of Saddam, culturally and economically, but have gotten nowhere in negotiations with Maliki about getting more substantial portions of the oil revenues. So while Maliki is a few thousand militants marching towards Baghdad, the Kurds just took over Kirkuk, which is where they believe to be their ancestral home. It's a pretty baller move, and now they have Kirkuk and this very effective fighting force called the Peshmerga, who were responsible for capturing both Saddam Hussein and the messenger that finally brought down bin Laden. So they're in a pretty sweet spot for negotiating with Maliki. Now they could take back some of northern Iraq pretty effectively for him in exchange for more autonomy in government and larger portions of oil revenues. But back to ISIS. So ISIS has taken over a large portion of Iraq, but it's been almost all Sunni cities. Some believe that Sunni government officials ordered the surrender of these cities, but for whatever reason, they're in a surprisingly good position to move in on Baghdad, as they have Baghdad surrounded from the west, north, and east, and have moved faster than Baghdad could organize its forces. Then things took a turn. ISIS released an audio recording to its members to congratulate them on a job well done and vowed they'll push into Baghdad, Karbala, and Najaf. Karbala and Najaf serve no tactical purposes, but they are the two holiest cities in Iraq for Shia Muslims, and the Sunni ISIS militants just vowed to destroy them. There's no good analogies to explain how big of a deal that threat was, because us waspy folks just don't have sacred places quite like Middle Eastern culture, But imagine somebody who wants to kill you and then decides to also kill your children. All of a sudden, it goes from an existential fear to outright primal rage. Iraqi Shiite leader Grand Ayatollah al-Sistani released a message requesting all Shiites to defend their religion. And so, as ISIS was moving into a city south of Tikrit called Samarra, hundreds and allegedly thousands of Shiite militants have been bused to Samarra to protect holy shrines there, and are facing off as we speak with ISIS. Also, the Iraq military has organized 4 brigades to protect Baghdad and move on the ISIS positions. Shia-majority Iran has sent over 500 Republican Guard to work with the Iraqi military, and the U.S. has more or less said that while it won't send troops in, it's certainly open to other military influence if Baghdad truly becomes threatened. So what seemed like a steamrolling of Iraq by ISIS has turned into a much different narrative. It's impossible to predict exactly what will happen next because no one knows the exact size of ISIS forces, how many fighters they've gained by taking those cities, or even what kind of weaponry they have after raiding police stations and army posts, but it seems as though Baghdad is finally in a position to not only defend themselves, but also make headway in taking back some of the cities they lost. Also, hundreds of American contractors have already been evacuated from cities north of Baghdad, but there's still between 2,000 and 5,000 Americans in Iraq working very hard with their Iraqi counterparts to stop the violence and try and get the Iraqi people moving forward. So that's where we stand. Military forces from both Iraq and Iran, along with Shiite militant pilgrims, are facing off against ISIS forces across Iraq. A lot of people are going to die tonight. The world is changing as we speak, and it's your duty as a human to look at what's happening and learn from it. Until quite recently in world history, you could point to anywhere on a globe and say, they're hopeless, they're always going to kill each other. But this world is changing. We now expect even the lowest citizens to have their voices heard and their votes counted. There will soon be more people dying from obesity than hunger. It's quickly becoming expected that a pregnant woman will both survive her pregnancy and raise her child to adulthood. The world is improving because the people inside of it are learning. I'm challenging you to take this, all of this, and learn from it. Every other veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom and every contractor that's come to work here knew that giving the Iraqi people a chance at true freedom was worth risking your life for. If, in the end, Iraq falls back into oppression, if the people are silenced and their spirits crushed, if ISIS takes Baghdad and this is the last time I get to talk to you, know that for me, it was all worth it if you go out into your world realizing that life and the people in it are complex and worth caring about. Thank you for your time.